Good evening, everyone. This is Steve Ward with Docked Out. Thanks so much for joining. It's awesome to be here. I have an exciting program planned tonight, so I'm thrilled that you're with us. You're welcome to chat in any questions or comments, and towards the end, I'll be happy to go through those and answer those for you. So I'm on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok. You can search for Docked Out Official, all together, one word. You can also visit the website, dockedout.org, and feel free to send me an email, and I'll get back with you with any questions that you might have, anything at all. Happy to chat with you. So tonight I'm continuing on a presentation about UFOs, or UAPs as they're now called. And down in the comments, I have a couple of references for you. In particular, I want to draw your attention. I have a great book that I would commend towards you. It's called Lights in the Sky and Little Green Men by Hugh Ross, Kenneth Samples, and Mark Clark. This is a great reference for you if you're interested. I've also gotten some good information from this other book here called The Second Coming of the New Age by Stephen Bancarz and Josh Peck. So those references are down in the comments, as well as some websites that are helpful, and some other references that you might find handy. So as you might have noticed, this whole topic of UFOs is still in the mainstream media. It's not going away. And if you really think about it, we have a culture that is based in evolutionary theory, or let's just say naturalism. So it makes sense, right? So if you believe that the universe is huge, there are millions, billions, even trillions of planets that exist throughout the entire universe. If you're an evolutionist, it's reasonable to think, okay, well, there's life here on Earth, so there must be, just statistically speaking, life someplace else. But is that really true? And that's what I want to investigate a little bit with you tonight. It's important that we set aside opinions and just learn to follow the evidence wherever that might lead us. So, what are the sources that we can use as we investigate an important matter such as this? Well, for Christians, we have the Bible. And then there's, let's just say, science. Now, there is no contradiction if we interpret the Bible correctly and interpret science correctly, or what science allows a scientist to determine. Those will align very, very well without contradiction. But we're prone to biases, aren't we? So that's really important, that we set aside our opinions and biases and just learn to follow the evidence. Now, in our last program, I discussed a little bit about some of the theological implications of whether or not there could be extraterrestrial intelligent life on some other planet. Now, remember, at the fall in the Garden of Eden, the entire creation was affected. So that would mean the entire universe. And if there are intelligent beings elsewhere, they would also be affected by the fall. So we have to answer that question. Are these extraterrestrial intelligent beings fallen, or are they sinless and perfect in the eyes of God? What are the implications of that? If aliens hypothetically are life on some other planet, then we have to answer that question. And we identified some really important theological roadblocks to this idea of extraterrestrial life. For example, if these other beings are fallen like we are, then does that mean that Jesus then has to put off his human nature and travel to some other planet, take on the nature of some other species, and then be their savior? If that was the case, hypothetically, then what happens to our salvation? And the Bible clearly says that Jesus is seated at the right hand of the Father, and he came in human form, took on our human form for the atonement, right? So that violates a lot of theology there. What if these extraterrestrials are spiritually sinless, for example? Then that would mean, as Christ returns to the earth and establishes his kingdom here on earth and heaven in eternal future, the existing universe is going to be done away with, right? So that means God would punish or destroy the home and these other beings, which that seems to violate God's justice. So either way, there are these really important theological implications, and the Bible really says that no, there is no extraterrestrial intelligent life because it would violate Scripture. But if you're a scientist that is an atheist, if you believe in evolution and you reject the Bible as true and reliable, then you might say, well, who cares? I don't believe what the Bible says anyway, so let's just follow science. So that's our challenge tonight. I want to take that uh, challenge and let's follow the science and see where that brings us. And I think what you would find if you follow with me tonight, that the likelihood of intelligent extraterrestrial life is zero on some other planet. And because the alien phenomenon, the UFO phenomenon, is real, it is observed, yet these are not beings from a distant planet, then what are they? It raises all these other questions that we have to answer. And I think as we conclude this evening, I hope to help you conclude that these are real beings, but not physical. And that opens the door to the question, well, what do you mean? What is non physical? So is that a spiritual being? And I would argue, yes, that is exactly the case. In fact, most all of the serious UFO researchers, regardless of religious background or anything else going on, most serious thinkers about this who are doing the research do not believe that these are physical extraterrestrial beings from a distant planet. Most researchers looking into this deeply do not believe that this is a physical phenomenon, but it's real. Real, but not physical is really what we're getting at. So why do we think that? I mean, what are some of the ideas here? Well, a UFO does not break the sound barrier, does not create a sonic boom when it goes from 0 to the speed of sound and beyond. There is no sonic boom. That would be physically impossible if this is an actual flying saucer, a machine that is traveling and breaking the sound barrier. There are these right angle maneuvers or disappearing down into the ground or down into the ocean, traveling at speeds that would kill any living being on board with some of these maneuvers that violate physics. So there's some evidence. We also don't see UFOs out in orbit entering Earth's atmosphere. We don't see the burning up of a craft as it comes in and out of our atmosphere. We don't observe those things as if there was travel from some other planet. And here is the key: if this was a technological craft, a physical craft from some other planet, it would have to operate within the laws of physics, right? If it's a physical thing, it has to obey the laws of physics. And the fact that these craft do not speak to the idea that this is not a physical phenomenon or physical only. Another consideration is the enormous distances involved in traveling from even the nearest star that has planets, and we'll get into that more. Raising the question of could an alien from some other planet survive the distances traveled and actually arrive here in one piece. And now we're getting into some of the more important considerations. There is a profound connection to the occult in this UFO phenomenon that's really important to know about. And a lot of the people who have had encounters will describe very deceptive, very malevolent intent of these supposed alien beings. And we need to get into that in more detail. You hear about alien abduction, you hear about some of the messages that these entities are giving people that have come into contact with them, medical procedures that are very primitive. So it raises just these questions of if this is some type of a super race in the universe that is so amazingly advanced, they're able to travel here, then why is there this moral or spiritual, um, you know, uh, evil, if you will, or this deception or this malevolent intent that's involved, and spiritual messages about religion, specifically an anti-Christian, anti-biblical type of messages that are coming through. So there are some thoughts, but we'll get into all of that a little bit more as we get through tonight. So, what does it really take for life to exist at all? Can there be life someplace else in the universe? That's the key question. So, I want to take you on a little bit of a whirlwind tour of what is really required, the basic necessities for life. So this research has been done. So over the years, if you think about the periodic table of the elements, right? There are only three elements that could participate in complex chemistry, the type of chemistry that would be required for life, for biochemistry. And those three elements are silicon, boron, and carbon. But there are problems with silicon. It's not able to have long, lengthy chains of amino acids and complex proteins that could be involved in this type of chemistry. So silicon is excluded, and it's not possible that complex life could be silicon based. Boron could participate in some reactions, but its presence is actually toxic to the type of chemical reactions that would be required. So, really, the only candidate left is carbon. The carbon atom is the building block, the foundation of biochemistry, essential for life. And honestly, there's just no way to get around that. No matter how far away, no matter what the environment might be on some other planet and in the other side of the universe, any type of complex life must be carbon based. And that's just the way it is in order for the complex molecules to be possible. So keep that in mind. The fact that this type of life would have to be carbon based has implications. But as life supposedly evolves on some planet elsewhere, there are other considerations. There's a phrase called irreducible complexity that I'd like to introduce to you. It's simply the idea that if you think about a single cell, you have to have so much intact simultaneously in order for that cell to operate. So you need to have the DNA transcription machinery intact, which is multiple complex molecules, all within the protective boundary of a cell membrane. And the messenger proteins, the pores in the membrane, the transport of nutrients and water, all of those things have to be intact at the same time for that cell to function. So the likelihood of all of these things by slow accumulation of mutations over time into a functioning cell, even is just not possible. It just speaks very, very heavily against the theory of evolution, and we'll get more into that, some other time, in a different program. But just keep that in the back of your mind that this concept of irreducible complexity is really a showstopper in terms of evolutionary theory. There are some myths that I want to make you aware of that are out there in the popular culture. So, you might have heard the claim that we have recreated the primordial soup in the lab. So, basically, the conditions, the pond sludge that is theorized to have existed in the beginning of Earth's history. And then you have the lightning flash, the energy that, creates the first chemical reactions for simple molecules to form, etc. So that has actually never been done in the lab. We have never replicated this theoretical primordial soup. It's just has not happened. Okay. Another myth you might hear of is that we have created an RNA molecule in the lab. That is also not true. So RNA, in fact, will deteriorate very rapidly. So the likelihood of an RNA molecule in the early Earth primordial soup uh, being intact long enough under those conditions for complex chemistry to proceed and for evolution to proceed. That simply is not possible. So there's a lot going on here that are really separate topics from where we're going with the UFOs. But I just want to illustrate that the likelihood of forming life with evolutionary means is just not possible to do, regardless of how long is given. Okay, regardless of the amount of time that is involved. Other problems you might hear of is something called the UV paradox. So, what that means is that think about the early Earth in evolutionary theory. So, this idea that we have this chemical reactions going on in the primordial soup. Well, oxygen is required for life, right? But if you actually study out the chemistry involved, if oxygen was present, the presence of oxygen would disrupt the biochemistry and life would never proceed, it would never form. Likewise, if oxygen is not present, then the UV radiation bombarding the earth would also destroy the early molecules and life wouldn't form either. So, with or without, we have this paradox, which really speaks against the evolutionary basis or the means of how life formed. So, hold on to those ideas in the back of your mind. So, complex, intelligent life needs remarkably unique and very rare, exquisitely fine tuned conditions. Remember the claim, though. Well, if there's enough stars and planets out there and enough time, then life must exist somewhere, right? Well, actually, no. And I want to try to explain a little bit about why. So think about what is required for a planet to support life. Well, first, there's the actual rotation of the planet itself. If the rotation is too fast, we would have out of control wind conditions. Too slow, we would have extreme temperature variations between night and day, and life couldn't exist. What about the sun? Well, the sun itself, the distance to its nearby planets is critical because of the heat and radiation given off, right? So if the sun is too large, the chemical reactions would be too rapid, too much radiation. If the distance to the sun is too far, then the water cycle is disrupted. There are all of these complications, but it's really the planet's ability to reflect radiation from the sun to absorb with the correct rotation and the correct distance to the sun, which is its star that it's associated with. Right off the bat, you're eliminating over 99% of all the planets that could be found in the universe. So we're narrowing the list of available planets incredibly just with some basic criteria. Some other thoughts is that the planet and its nearby star have to be rich in heavy metals to support the formation of rock and for the proper minerals and building blocks of life to exist. And that's not true everywhere. What about gravity? So if gravity was too weak on this planet, then water vapor would escape out into the atmosphere and not be available for the water cycle. If gravity was too strong, then we would retain toxic, noxious gases in our atmosphere, and life couldn't exist either. How about the actual orbit, the shape of the orbit, the tilt of the Earth has to be exquisitely precise for seasons, for temperature variation, and so forth. The magnetic field of the Earth that deflects charged particles coming from the sun to protect us from radiation has to be precise. And then there's the recycling of minerals through volcanoes and seismic activity as water runs off into the ocean and brings minerals and nutrients with it down into the ocean. The tectonic plates will actually bring these down into the crust and then uplift them back. So there's this recycling requirement that the planet must have. And some other things you might not have really thought of, but the proximity to nearby huge planets that we call gas giants. This here is Jupiter, but Saturn is another, and so is Neptune. So, what's the significance of nearby gas giants? Well, basically, a giant planet that is neighboring where life exists serves many functions. So, as comets and asteroids and meteors are hurtling through space, these large, huge gas giants will actually, by gravity, pull those objects towards itself and deflect them off of, in our case, the Earth. So, a planet that would support life would have to have nearby larger planets in order to perform the same function. But if those outer planets are too close, then that would disrupt the planet's orbit and cause all other kinds of problems. So there has to be exquisite positioning of nearby planets and bodies in order to account for this. Atmospheric pressure is yet another. So if the pressure is too small, then there's also water evaporation complications and other things. So I think you get the point that there is exquisite fine tuning and rare circumstances that have to be in place for a planet to be able to support life. And there are many, many more that I'm not getting into, but this is just to try to give you some illustrations. Um, the nearby star of a planet that requires life, the size has to be precise, the color has to be precise. Otherwise, photosynthesis couldn't occur, or the rates of burn of the star is incorrect and would be too hot, too cold, too much, too little radiation. So there are those considerations too. And expanding out further than any given solar system is the actual galaxy itself. And what's really interesting is that the vast majority of galaxies across the universe that we've observed do not have any planets. It's like 95% of galaxies don't have any planets, and they're very metal poor, meaning that they don't have the materials necessary to have rocky planets like Earth to support life, or the stars to participate in the proper reactions and expelling the elements that are needed to a planet that would support life. You've heard of supernova. Those are basically stars as they, burn out and explode and release, eject elements into space. If a planet is too close to one of those, then obviously there's all kinds of radiation problems from that, or too far, then a newly forming planet wouldn't capture those elements into it and would also be metal poor and unable to sustain life. So, all of these, complications, and like I said, there's 175 or more, of these at least, but these are a few. Just take a step back. As the universe has expanded, if that rate of expansion is too great, too fast, then all of the matter on the exterior, on the periphery, if you will, would be too far apart from one another. So gravity wouldn't be able to coalesce those into stars and planets. It would just go out and there wouldn't be any interaction there. So, there's just kind of another thought for you. When you put all these things together, it certainly seems that Earth is entirely, absolutely unique. And we're reinforcing again the idea that there was a beginning to space, time, and matter, which means the person, God, or whatever process or cause that you want to attribute has to be outside of space, outside of time, and outside of matter. So that's a spiritual, all powerful, timeless, spaceless creator, which is the God of the Bible. There's really no escape of that. If the universe was infinitely old, the expansion, the collapse, the accordion style effect of this process over such a length of time, we would have already burnt out the usable energy in the entire universe by now, and there wouldn't be life anyway. So just keep that in mind. If you add together all of these parameters, and there are so many more, if you take into consideration all of the parameters of fine tuning that have to come together for life to exist, the odds of that is extraordinarily low. In fact, the odds of that happening even once is 1 in 10 to the 172nd power. Okay, that's a 1 with 172 zeros after it. I mean, it's just incomprehensible the odds that speak against life existing anywhere, even here on Earth. And there are only 10 to the 80th power, roughly, atoms in the entire universe. So that gives you a little bit of a framework of the odds that we're speaking of. And that's why I say that the likelihood of there being life on some other planet is zero. There's a common objection you might hear. People say, well, we're here, so maybe it's super incredibly unlikely, but we're here, right? So therefore, it happened, so it must be possible to happen. So why not happen someplace else? But remember that just because we're here, that doesn't mean that we evolved and this is all from natural causes. So a statement such as that is really going into it from the perspective of evolutionary theory, and it's biased in that direction. So that's all you're going to see. You could also say, and this is what I would say as a Christian, is that we're here, yeah. And that means that we were created to be here under exceptionally fine-tuned circumstances. That's a completely valid conclusion as well from the fact that we're here. So you have to be careful with some of the kind of logic puzzles that people get drawn into, and just understand that often there are biases underneath, how people are thinking about some of these bigger questions. So, despite all of that, despite the likelihood of extraterrestrial intelligent life being zero, despite all that, there are a lot of people who believe that there are extraterrestrials. So, what do we make sense of this? And what about the idea that maybe aliens from some other planet brought life here, and that is what started life here on Earth? So that comes out of the New Age movement. That's a New Age theory that I'll talk more about. But basically, remember that hypothetically, if there was an extraterrestrial civilization someplace, remember that the universe had a beginning, which means it had a creator. So even some extraterrestrial beings have a creator and had a beginning. So this idea that life was transported here somehow from some distant planet doesn't answer the question of how life began. And it doesn't avoid or get around the fact that we have to explain the creation event with a creator. So it doesn't help. It doesn't undermine Christianity whatsoever to make the claim or to have the belief that an extraterrestrial, civilization exists somewhere and they seeded life here. But we'll answer that a little bit more. So hypothetically, if there are extraterrestrials somewhere, how do they get here? So are they traveling in spaceships? So remember that if these are physical spaceships, they have to obey the laws of physics. And there are a lot of problems with this idea. So the distances are so immense, it's hard to even wrap our mind around them. But the nearest star that has a gas giant protective planet is over 50 light years away. But if you were to travel the speed of light, and you would have to go around all of the different obstructions that are in the way between that location and Earth, such as neutron stars that emit, life-killing radiation, supernova, same thing, cosmic dust, and comets and asteroid fields that are blanketing and surrounding the Milky Way. To travel through that safely over such incredible distances is just not possible to do. But let's say that that was the attempt that some extraterrestrial civilization was making. So that entire pathway from this nearest planet candidate to here is about 200 light years of distance, that a spaceship would have to travel. Well, that would take about over 20,000 years to do that. And the reason is that you can't travel the speed of light. That violates physics. as you're traveling faster, by relativity, the mass of the object traveling that fast goes up and up and up exponentially. And the energy required for it to travel goes up and up and up exponentially. There's also this problem of time dilation, which is a strange concept to us, but the faster you travel, time slows for you, but time continues relative to you elsewhere. So as you're traveling closer and closer towards the speed of light, it's as if you're traveling way, way into the future, so to speak. So by the time you arrive, the planet or the galaxy or the civilization you're trying to get to is probably out of existence, or there's just a lot that can go on in over 20,000 years, right? And that begs the question, so does this mean that extraterrestrials have 20 or more generations of ETs on board the spaceship, traveling over incredible amounts of time and distance just to get here? Doesn't sound like that would be likely at all. So you hear theories. Well, what about traveling through space? Space is not empty. Remember the comets. Look at the damage done to the Hubble by a tiny fleck of space dust. A ship traveling through comets in an asteroid field, it would just not survive. So then there's theory, well, what about wormholes? What about this phenomenon where you can travel through, cover vast distances by taking these shortcuts called wormholes? Well, mathematically, those are possible, but basically a wormhole could theoretically occur in the vicinity of two black holes that are near each other and allow passage through. But the problem is that any life or really any object approaching a black hole would be completely obliterated and destroyed by the incredible forces of gravity that are involved by the black hole. So that's not possible either. It's just by the laws of physics not possible to do. And I don't know what else can you really say. If you put all of the statistics together, to really make the claim that there is an extraterrestrial on some other planet that is suitable for life, that traveled such immense distances and actually come and go as they please successfully, it's just not possible to do. So if these are not intelligent alien beings, then what are there? So what are the patterns or the characteristics of some of these alien encounters? Well, we see UFOs appearing and disappearing. There are also physical effects, so non-physical crash sites. There's no debris that has ever been found, but sometimes you see physical effects such as grass that's burnt. You might see bushes or trees that are damaged, other things like that. People that have had abduction type of experiences will describe fear, anxiety, undergoing all kinds of travel or medical procedures, but coming back often, sometimes with no physical effects of that, but sometimes there can be. Even in some of the closer encounters with these extraterrestrials, people have been scarred, physically burned, even killed in some instances. So this is a very serious thing, but these are not physical beings, extraterrestrials from other planets. In order to understand the origin, we have to get a little bit deeper into patterns that we see in New Age religion, which is heavily influenced by the occult. People that have had alien encounters often describe, and the people that know them before and after will often say that this encounter has resulted in a complete transformation in the individual's spiritual religious belief system. There's a completely different spiritual worldview. And there's also the observation that these entities will make scientific claims. Like years ago, they would claim to be from the moon. But as we discover there's no life on the moon, then they would change the story. And now they were from Mars or from Venus, and now they're from other more distant systems, the Pleiades, and so forth. So, this is coming out of New Age, but there are people who have had contact with these non-physical beings and have gotten messages such as that, that are basically putting forth scientific statements or claims that are proven or provably false. Um, we also see that the technology changes. So, early UFO sightings was much different than today. So there's this phenomenon where the UFO will parallel and always be a step ahead of our own technology. But years ago, the UFO would be much more primitive than what we observe today. Today, a UFO has been tracked at over 10,000 miles an hour, 10 to 15,000 miles an hour, then stop on a dime, go up at right angles, crash into the, or disappear, I should say, into the earth or the ocean. That would kill anything living on board. There's just no question. Again, speaking to the fact that these are spiritual beings, these are not physical beings. And the fact that they actually message and promote spiritual themes, I think, is a huge clue. So, keep in mind that the idea that aliens have been traveling here and have visited primitive civilizations, that's very common in the mainstream media. So, you see art, you see hieroglyphics, you see all kinds of references that people have taken to be alien visitation from outer space. You hear the claim that aliens gave us the technology and the skills to build the pyramids, and to do other things. You see, here's the Nazca, just all these different phenomenon. And, what does this really mean? So how do we make any sense of this? Well, ancient civilizations, and the documentation and the records that we have actually never made the claim that they're being visited by aliens from some other planet. But there are elements of the belief in the pagan rituals. What it really was all about is this belief that they were having encounters with beings that are interdimensional, so to speak, spiritual beings that are non-physical, but they can appear in an interdimensional type of a pattern, and they make contact and are generally malevolent, but you can appease them by things like blood sacrifice. And there's the whole pagan system of ritual, of worship. So a lot of that is what is really going on in, the religious experiences of ancient civilizations not being visited by aliens from other planets. And I certainly believe that this is really demonic in nature. And I think, that's, I think, gaining a little bit of momentum as we, talk and think a little bit more about this phenomenon. Be careful of what's happening in popular culture. This assumption that, well, there must be life. We don't know. So there must be. We've all evolved anyway. Okay, not true. It's just not true. This is coming out of New Age religion, and it's not new. Part of what we hear is, in terms of some of the messages that have come through these alien encounters, it's the idea that these alien beings have visited in the past and promised to return. There are also themes about, reincarnation. Again, the idea that we have had former lives in a universe that is infinitely old, that doesn't have a creator God. These beliefs are all common in the New Age system, where the goal is to achieve a higher level of enlightenment, or a higher vibration, or a higher state or level of consciousness. It's really and this idea that you are your own God. It's your own divinity. It's elevating your own self-awareness, the power of self, changing your own consciousness to merge it into some type of a universal consciousness. The universe doesn't have a conscience. The universe is not living. There are living things in the universe like us, but the universe consists of space, time, and matter, right? And it had a beginning by a creator who is outside of those things. The universe does not have a mind or a consciousness of its own. That is New Age religion. but that is the messages that are coming through. So this idea that we're somehow going to become one with the universe, have our consciousness merged into some greater universal God consciousness in a very nebulous way. That's a key characteristic of messages that are coming from these supposed aliens. They'll often say that all religions are the same, and that all religions are trying to arrive at truth, and therefore are all the same. There's this claim of tolerance. The same thing that's going on in our culture today: be tolerant, tolerate everything. But then if you talk about the Bible or make Christian claims or speak about the deity of Christ or the need for our salvation, the atonement on the cross, all those things, then no tolerance for that, but supposed tolerance, right? So there's a contradiction there, which I think tells you a little bit about, what's going on behind this. There's also a new age idea that Jesus was not the son of God. Jesus was an extraterrestrial. He was just an alien being who came, was a prophet, a good teacher, but really just undermining this whole idea of the atonement and the deity of Christ. So how does this actually, work in new age, religion? Like what's going on? So, there are some texts you might have heard of the Urantia book, it's called, where multiple authors claim to have been getting messages from spirit guides, and they were writing automatically into this book, giving all kinds of messages about the universe and our origin. But I want you to know that a significant portion of that, about 1/3 of that book, was dedicated to debunking the deity of Christ and the need for salvation. Okay, so think about that for a minute. Take a step back. Let's say hypothetically that we're our own civilization here on Earth, and then separately on some distant planet, there evolves some other alien civilization. So you're telling me that they would have something to say about our belief in Jesus, somebody who came here. It's just very bizarre. So how would some alien civilization hypothetically even be aware of that, right? So I think the non-physical, spiritual, demonic element here is really showing its true colors because the messages are specifically anti-Christ. And that's just the way it is. These resources are out there, and it's very plain to see. New interpretations of the meaning of Jesus's teaching is another big thing. There's something that I wanted to let you know about. So there's something called quantum hypnosis therapy, which is being done by these new age mediums who will put you into this hypnotic type of a trance state and guide you along this session where you are having an encounter with spirit guides, as they are called. And while in this trance like state, like being under hypnosis, you encounter these spirit guides who tell you about your previous life or lives, tell you about what's happening on Earth, changes to come, uh, give messages that, basically try to imply that you're on this journey of higher evolution, that you're about to make the next step of your own personal development, and so is everybody else who follows the wisdom of these spirit guides. So this is something that does take place, and there are messages that people get, and it's interesting to know that there are patterns or things that statements and claims that are made by these demonic spirit guides that fall into categories that we can learn about and understand the true origin of this in the spiritual basis. There's this occult practice called astral projection, where in occult manner, your spirit actually leaves your body and travels through space to the other planets, and you have these encounters with spirit beings. This is all demonic in nature. There's the out of body experiences, there's dabbling with tarot cards, there's the fortune telling. All of these have a common denominator, and the common denominator is simply that dabbling in the occult will have deleterious effects every time. And of course, the Bible speaks against this and warns against this, and it's something that we shouldn't do. But the messages are clearly anti-Christ, and that's really my point. This UFO phenomenon is not benign. These are non-physical spiritual beings that, yes, they do appear here and interact and give deceptive messages, and we need to be warned about it. We need to understand what's really going on here. So, what are some of the messages? So, people that are contacted, or these contactees within the new age, are told that they are chosen for a special mission, that they're going to be given some type of special doctrine or some type of special revelation. And these contactees are given a mission to help humanity achieve its next stage in spiritual evolution. There's also messages that it was really aliens that created human DNA in a lab on another planet and brought that here, that we were made in their image, not the image of God. So again, there's this anti-biblical, anti-God, anti-Christ theme that runs through all of this. These spirit guides will often claim to be formerly physical beings that have now evolved to a higher spiritual state. And you can too, if you just, stay with us. A lot of themes of reincarnation, discovering past lives through channeling. The idea that aliens are spirit guides that help us achieve our next step in just attaining a higher level of consciousness or awareness. They're going to help teach us things that we don't know. Like, well, years ago it was building the pyramids, but now it's things like, avoiding natural disasters, fighting global warming, avoiding nuclear war. All these type of things are some of the messages that, hey, we're your friends. Don't believe that Bible stuff. You don't need salvation. Jesus was just an alien. He was one of us. So there's a very clear deception here, and I want to leave it there with that warning that this is demonic in nature. It's not benign. These entities will sometimes pose themselves to be, a loved one, or somebody that you know or have some type of familiarity with. But we know that Satan comes as an angel of light, right? And I'll close you with this thought. It has been very well documented, okay? Not making it up. But if somebody who is having an experience with an encounter with a UFO or one of these entities, if you call on the name of Jesus, these entities will flee. And that again is, to my mind, very strong evidence of what we're dealing with here. So in closing, stay away from it, be aware, but I think this is demonic in nature. It's real. It's not physical, but it is a real phenomenon that can have physical effects, and certainly deceptive spiritual effects. All right, I'm going to leave it there until next time. So I don't think we have any messages in the chat. So we'll close there for tonight. Have a great time, and I look forward to our time together next time. Bye-bye.